As a storyteller, I enjoy telling stories that entertain, educate, and empower. Please enjoy listening to my audiobook. If you like what you hear, please share. Thank you. Cold-Blooded by Arlene Brathwaite, Chapter 1. A black Harley-Davidson with chrome piping exited the thruway. The rider made a right turn at the stoplight and then turned onto First Street, pulling up behind a black BMW parked in front of a green and white brick house. The pot-bellied white man stepped out of his BMW when he saw the bike come to a full stop in his rearview mirror. He smoothed out his suit jacket that had become wrinkled while he sat in his car for the past hour. The rider climbed off the bike and removed her helmet. "I hope I didn't keep you waiting long, Hugh," Paris said as she took off her gloves and walked toward him. Her hourglass shape could easily be seen in the vacuum-sealed leather outfit she was wearing. Paris had a creamy brown complexion and was very attractive. "Oh no," Hugh said, tugging at his necktie. He shook her hand and stared at her for a moment. "I knew there was something different about you. You had braids the last time we met." "Yes," Paris said as she self-consciously touched her short hairdo. "It's the new me." "I like it," Hugh said. Paris removed her backpack and massaged the areas on her shoulders where the backpack straps had rested for the hour-long ride. "Okay, so let's get down to business." "Yes, of course. If you'll just follow me." Hugh retrieved the house keys from his pocket and led the way. Paris's world began to fade away as they walked toward the house. She was now in a world of childhood memories, some pleasant, some not so pleasant. She was one of many foster kids that Emma adopted over the years, one of the many foster kids that came with prepackaged problems. Born addicted to crack, thanks to her crack-addicted mother. Molested by her mother's get-high partners. Left alone at the age of 5, for days at a time to fend for herself while her mother went on crack binges. Paris retreated deeper into her mind to her safe place. The place she would go when the pains and unspeakable acts of her life became unbearable. Paris tried blinking away her tears as they began to form at the corners of her eyes, but they were welling too quickly and they began to fall. She tried to wipe them away before Hugh noticed them. Hugh heard her sniffle and turned in time to see her wipe away her last tear. "You okay?" Hugh asked. "Yes, this is just so surreal." "If you're not up to this, we can reschedule for another." "No, I'm okay. Let's do this." Hugh looked at her for a moment and then nodded. He unlocked the front door. "Everything is just the way Emma left it." She followed him into the house. Paris looked at the pictures of young children hanging along the living room wall. "She had a lot of foster children," Hugh said. "Yes, she did. I was one of them." "Serious?" "Yep, that's me right there," she said, pointing to a little girl in a group photo. Hugh removed his glasses and took a closer look at the picture. "That is you," he said, checking out the skinny, knocked-kneed, braces-wearing girl. "I don't remember seeing you around." "I ran away when I was 14. I went back to the Bronx to find my mother." "Did you find her?" "No, but I did hook up with some people who later became my family. Now, here I am 14 years later, back in this small town, wondering why Emma would leave me her house. I wish I could answer that question for you. But you were the one who hired the private investigator to locate me. Emma said she needed my help to find you, but she didn't tell me why. All I did was hire the PI and give him all the information on you that Emma gave me." "I still can't believe she's dead," Paris said, shaking her head and signing the papers. "We're going to miss her, especially the kids." Paris walked him to the door. "Here's my card," Hugh said, handing it to her. "If you have any questions or need anything, don't hesitate to call." "I won't. Thank you." Paris closed the door behind him and leaned on it. She took a deep breath and started to take a tour of the house. Each room had its set of memories for Paris. She reached the basement door and froze. Past images of the basement from when she was a child flashed through her mind. Emma had both walls of the basement lined with bunk beds, 5 on one side, 5 on the other. It was hell for Paris, being the youngest of the 20 kids in a cramped basement. But the cramped quarters were heaven compared to where she came from. Paris turned the knob and slowly walked down the stairs. She rounded the corner and was shocked. The basement looked like one big game room. There were pool tables, ping pong tables, and card tables set up everywhere. She walked into another part of the basement and saw nothing but video games. There were Xboxes, PlayStations, and handheld video games. She picked up a Game Boy and looked at it. She tucked it in her pocket and went back upstairs. She climbed the stairs to the top floor. She entered Emma's bedroom and looked around. She shook her head and decided that she couldn't stay in her room. Paris opted for the room across the hall. It was smaller, but it would do. She shrugged off her backpack and pulled out the denim outfit she was going to wear for her first day of work tomorrow. Work, she thought to herself. I've never worked a day in my life. The next day, heads turned as Paris rode into town. She parked in front of the bookstore and took off her helmet. Dismounting, she caught the bookstore owner staring at her through the window. He came from around the counter and met her at the door. Paris? She took off her riding gloves and shook his hand. It's good to finally meet you in person, Neil. My aunt didn't tell me you rode a bike? No, that you were so damn beautiful. Hey, you're the boss. I'm supposed to be flattering you. She looked around the bookstore. It looked more like a cafe with the books in it. This place is different. Let me show you around. Paris followed him around and tried her best not to look bored as he gave her a tour. Neil was easy on the eyes, light skin, chiseled features, fresh fade. She quickly tore her eyes from his butt as he turned around. Any questions? Huh? No questions. They made their way back to the counter. So basically, you'll be working behind the counter? I think I can manage that. So, are you from around here or? I'm from Brooklyn originally. What about you? The Bronx. Paris cut her eyes at him. What did your aunt tell you about me? Neil hopped onto the counter. She called me and told me a friend of hers was moving into Emma's house. She said you would need a job. I said, no problem. That's it. Well, when she said friend, I imagined someone older, but that's about it. Is there something I should know? No. Paris quickly answered and placed her helmet on top of the counter. Yo, Neil. They both looked toward the front door. A 13-year-old kid came rushing in. Whose bike is that? That joint is crack, yo. His eyes focused on Paris. He put 2 and 2 together when he saw her helmet on the counter. That's your bike, Shorty? Shorty? Paris said. I didn't mean it like that, Shorty. Her name's Paris, Neil said, cutting in. And Paris, this pain in the ass is Scratch. You got a man? Scratch asked. Paris had to laugh. Boy, if you don't get away from me. Don't come in here harassing my new employee. Scratch. She's working here. Everybody's going to be coming up in here now. If you're not buying anything, beat your feet, Neil said. Scratch swiped the new Don Diva and Street Literature Review magazines off the rack. I'll take these. He pulled out a wad of bills and peeled off a 20. He put it in Paris's hand. Keep the change, love. Scratch. Before Neil could finish his sentence, Scratch was out the door. Scratch must have ran his mouth off to everyone he knew. 2 hours later, it seemed like every guy from town came to the bookstore to see the new eye candy. Later that evening, Neil had to kick them out in order to close. If I would have known that a pretty face would boost my sales by 200%, I would have hired one a long time ago. Sales went up 200%. Put it this way, there were guys in here who bought books who don't even know how to read. Stop playing. I'm dead serious. Neil looked out the window. Paris followed his gaze. 2 tricked-out vehicles coasted by the store. The first vehicle was a white Tahoe with tinted windows, sitting on 24S. The second was a burgundy Lexus with a gold stripe running down the middle. When they got to the corner, they made a U-turn and parked in front of Paris's bike. Paris watched a slim guy hop out of the Tahoe. She chuckled as the baggy jean, Tim's wearing, diamond in the ears having hustler, dramatically looked around before bopping toward the bookstore. The guy in the Lexus got out and leaned against the hood of his car. His woman stepped out and slid under his arm. The slim dude knocked on the glass door and then pointed to the closed sign. Yo, Neil, what up? We're closed. Come on, I know you ain't gonna do me like that. Neil dug in his pocket and pulled out his keys. Slim smiled when Neil opened the door. What up? He slapped Neil 5. Same old, same old. That's not what I'm hearing. He looked at Paris. I'm Cyrus. I'm Paris, I know. Word travels fast, she said. This is a small town. It's getting late, Cyrus, so, Neil started to say. I won't keep y'all any longer. I just stopped by to say hi to our new neighbor. Paris grabbed her helmet. I have to go. See you tomorrow, Neil said. I'll be looking for you at the lounge tonight, Cyrus said to Paris. Don't bother. I won't be there, Paris said as she strapped on her backpack. You don't hang out? Cyrus asked, getting a good look at her as she walked from behind the counter. Good night, Neil, Paris said, ignoring Cyrus's comment. Ouch, it's like that? Cyrus said. Paris exited the bookstore. What up? The girl snuggled up under her man's arm, said to Paris as she walked by. Paris acknowledged her with a nod before putting on her helmet. She started her bike and revved it. She locked the front brake and popped the clutch. She made a donut in the street before peeling off. That was hot, Rammel said. His girlfriend T elbowed him in the ribs. I saw you looking at that dyke bitch's ass. She got a fat ass, Rammel laughed. And you about to have a fat lip. Chapter 2. Over the next couple of weeks, Paris realized Hudson wasn't the rural place she remembered as a 14-year-old girl. There were a lot more gangs who seemed to be slowly overrunning the once slow, peaceful town. Cyrus's gang was by far the largest. They were originally from Albany, but word on the street was their gang's numbers were stretching as far down as New York City. His gang was the same as any other. They sold drugs to keep money in their pockets and recruited young kids to do their dirty work. Cyrus's thugs came into the bookstore on a regular, kicking their weak game, trying to get a read on her. Paris would smile and politely shoot them down. The chicks in Cyrus's clique definitely weren't feeling all the attention their men were giving her. Paris just shrugged off the women's glares and jealous remarks. She didn't want their wannabe hood-rich boyfriends. Besides, she was having too much fun working a real job. It wasn't as hard as she thought it would be. And Neil was good company. He wasn't trying to get with her. He kept their relationship strictly professional. For Paris, that was a breath of fresh air. The next morning, Paris pulled up to the bookstore bright and early. She stopped in her tracks. Neil was in the center aisle, stacking books on the shelf. His G-Unit tank top was fitting him right. Hey, he said, looking up. What are you doing here so early? I woke up early this morning and couldn't go back to sleep, so I figured I'd just come in. I don't have a particular dress code. If you want to wear short sleeves or a tank or whatever, I don't mind. You don't like my blouse? Yeah, I like it. I just noticed that you wear long sleeves a lot. I didn't know if you did because you thought I wanted you to, or I prefer to wear long sleeves when working. Okay, no problem. Neil finished stacking the books and walked over to the counter. Hand me that book right above you. When Paris reached overhead to grab the book, her sleeve slid back to the middle of her forearm. Is that a tattoo? Neil asked. Paris quickly pulled her sleeve back down. It looks like it goes up your whole arm. Paris handed him the book and pulled out her Game Boy. What does it say? Neil asked. Paris continued to ignore him. Is that why you wear long-sleeve shirts? I don't mind if you have a tattoo. You don't quit, do you? My bad. Sometimes I don't know when to shut up. Paris continued playing the game. I see you have a different Game Boy. There's like 20 of these things in the basement, and that's not counting the PlayStations and Xboxes. Emma's house used to be the neighborhood hangout spot. All the kids would go there after school. Paris tossed the Game Boy onto the counter. I was wondering why kids kept hanging around the house. They were starting to creep me out. I guess they miss hanging out in the basement, but they must be too scared to ask you if they can come in. Too scared? You're the biker broad. That's what the kids call you. Biker broad. That sounds so rough. It's just a name. I'm sure they'll stop calling you that once they get to know you. I hear you. When Paris pulled up to her house, she noticed 2 boys, no more than 9 years old, sitting on her porch. They immediately jumped off and started playing by the curb. Paris walked by them and stuck her key in the front door. She looked back at them and sucked her teeth. Hey, did you guys know Emma? Both boys nodded. When is she coming back? One of the boys asked. She's gone. She's not coming back. Why? Why? Because Paris felt a lump forming in her throat. She didn't cry when she first heard that Emma passed away, but having to tell the kids that she was dead made it more real for her. Y'all want to come inside and play in the basement? Yeah, both boys said at the same time. A couple of weeks later, the neighborhood kids had their hangout back. Peace to my peoples, Scratch said as he walked into the bookstore. What's happening? Neil asked. Ain't nothing. I just came in to get some CDs for the barbecue. You stopping by later on, Paris? I was thinking about it. If you need a date, Scratch started to say. Paris tried to snatch him up, but he was too quick. You're going to make me go upside that coconut head of yours, boy. Scratch purchased 5 CDs and left. You should head over to the barbecue after work. Everyone's going to be there, including me, Neil said. What's that supposed to mean? I'm just saying if you think you won't know anyone. I knew everyone in this small-ass town the second day I got here. You got jokes. Besides, I don't want the townspeople to think the biker broad is crashing their party. Check this out. As your boss, I'm ordering you to go to the barbecue and have a good time. I'll think about it. Fair enough. Neil grabbed a thin envelope from behind the counter. I'm going to run to the bank and make this hefty deposit. Think you can hold things down until I get back? Sure, why not? Okay, Neil left. 2 minutes hadn't passed until Paris heard someone walk in. She looked toward the front door with a smile. Her smile quickly turned to a frown. T, Ramel's girlfriend, walked in. She pretended to look at the magazines as she sashayed her way toward the counter. T put on a phony smile when she got to the counter. Where's your boss at? Paris put on an equally fake smile and answered. He stepped out. Really? T said with a snicker. What's that supposed to mean? It's just that Neil doesn't trust anyone to watch his business. Paris leaned on the countertop. Well, I'm not just anyone. Obviously. Obviously, Paris shot back. T picked up a few magazines and a few candy bars. Tell Neil I said hi. She turned to leave. I know you don't think you're just going to walk out of here without paying for that stuff. Excuse me? T turned back to face Paris. You better recognize who you're talking to. This is Orange Street Riders here. Paris shrugged her shoulders. I don't know what that means, but if you're not going to pay for that stuff, then you best to just leave it right here on the counter. T chuckled and turned to leave. Paris ran from around the corner and stepped in front of T. T looked her up and down. You sure you want to do this, Dyke? Call me Dyke one more time. Both women looked at the front entrance when they heard it open. Neil walked in and quickly assessed the situation. What's going on? You obviously didn't train your employee well enough, T said with attitude. Or she would have known that Orange Street Riders own a piece of every business in this town, so we don't pay for anything. Paris looked over at Neil, and his silence let her know that T was telling the truth. T looked over at Neil. You want to tell your pit bull to move out my way before I put her out of her misery? You talk real tough, but I know you better than you think. Dyke, if you don't. Paris shoved her. The magazines and candy went flying as T tried to catch her balance. Bitch, what'd I tell you about calling me that? Whoa, Neil said, getting in between them. Bitch, you done fucked up, T yelled as she tried to get at Paris. Neil grabbed T and restrained her. Paris tried to get at her, but Neil held his hand out. Paris, chill. Paris could tell that Neil was talking to her as her boss, and if he had to choose a side, it would be T and the Orange Street Riders. Paris held her hands in the air. You got it, boss. Paris stormed out the bookstore and hopped on her bike. She peeled off before Neil had a chance to chase after her. Chapter 3. Paris stormed into her house and tossed her keys on the kitchen counter before reaching into the fridge for a beer. She drank half the bottle before slamming it down on the counter. She took deep breaths and tried to get T's face out of her mind. Paris cracked a smile. The old Paris would have waited for T to walk out the bookstore and cracked her head wide open with a tire iron. Paris could feel her temperature rise as she thought of all the ways she could make T scream in pain. That's not me anymore, Paris said to herself. She made herself a promise that when she left New York City, she would also leave her old self behind. She finished the rest of the beer, and with a loud belch, she decided she was going to the barbecue. She promised to leave all the violence behind, but being nonviolent and being a punk are two different things. She was going to show the Orange Street Riders that she wasn't a punk. Paris rode into the park and pulled up alongside Cyrus's car. Glad you could make it, Cyrus said, eyeing her brown leather pants and cream shirt. I figured it was time for me to get out and get some air. Cyrus looked her up and down. The air is really fresh over here right next to me. I bet it is, Paris said, walking away from him. Where you going? Cyrus called after her. Paris turned around to answer his question, but decided he wasn't worth the time and kept it moving. Paris rolled her eyes when she saw Neil heading straight for her. Hey, what are you doing here? You gave me an order, remember? Don't want to disobey the boss and get fired. By the way, who's my boss anyway? You? Or the Orange Street Riders? Neil shook his head. So you're going to take it there? I just need to know where I stand in this mix of bullshit. It's not what you think. Business slowed down a lot a few years back. I was on the brink of giving up and closing down shop. But in walks Cyrus and he offers me a deal where I sell him a piece of my business and I stay in business. Made a deal with the devil? I prefer seeing it as taking the lesser of the two evils. Whatever. Paris started walking away. Hey, Neil caught up to her. If you think I was taking sides at the bookstore, I wasn't. Really? That's not what it looked like to me. Neil grasped her hand. If it really came down to me having to choose a side, it would be yours. Every time. Paris's heart fluttered. She quickly looked away, hoping Neil didn't catch her blushing. Neil squeezed her hand. Enough about work. We're at a barbecue. Let's have some fun. Paris smiled. As much as she wanted to stay mad with Neil, she couldn't. His charm had won her over. She nodded and walked with him into the park. People might think we're a couple now. with you holding my hand and all. Would that be such a bad thing? It may taint your geeky reputation. Neil cocked his head. Geeky reputation? You're always reading. You own a bookstore. You rarely use slang. People are always coming into the store asking for your advice on various topics. I bet if you were to run for mayor, you would win by a landslide. It was Neil's turn to look away so Paris wouldn't see him blushing. I'm not geeky. Sure you are. But don't be ashamed, own it, because geeky is the new sexy. Neil arched his eyebrow. You think I'm sexy? Paris nodded. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty refreshing to be around a man whose main focus isn't to get in my pants. And for some strange reason, I find that to be very sexy. Really? Paris stopped him in his tracks and stood in front of him so that they were face to face. Just so we're clear, you and we're never going to be more than just friends, and we're not going to be friends with benefits, or each other's booty calls, or never is such an absolute term, which is why I chose to use it. Fine, Neil said, prompting her to continue walking. I'm probably not your type anyway. You're probably into biker dudes with bulging muscles, long beards, and bald heads. You'll be surprised what my type is. Neil stopped walking. Really? Paris shoved him. Keep it moving. This conversation is over. Some of the neighborhood kids ran up on them. Paris, can you ride me on your bike? A young girl asked. Maybe later, baby. I see you got a little following, Neil said, looking at the kids trailing them. What can I say? Biker chicks are cool. Yo-yo, Scratch called out to them. He left the crew of youngins he was with. I knew y'all were coming. He slapped Neil 5 and bumped fists with Paris. Y'all want something to eat? I'll get my little soldiers to fix y'all something. Your little soldiers? Paris echoed. Yeah, Scratch said, pointing to the boys he just left. Paris recognized a lot of them from hanging out in her basement. I'll get my own food, Paris said. Whatever. I'ma holler at y'all later, Scratch said as he headed back to the group of kids he came from. Kids today, Paris said, shaking her head. She peeped Cyrus and his crew in a corner of the park they had locked down. That was where Scratch and his little soldiers were heading. Paris knew Cyrus and his crew was corrupting the youth of the town, but she didn't seem to care. Now she was becoming emotionally attached to some of the kids. Leon, she called out to one of the boys in Scratch's group. The little boy turned around. Come here. He looked at Scratch and then at Paris. Boy, you hear me calling you? Get over here. He ran up to her. Where's your mother? Leon shrugged. Paris shook her head. Leon's situation reminded her of herself and her crack-addicted mother. Paris knew Leon's mother. Marisol was an addict when she caught her buying crack from a local drug dealer a few weeks back. Her first reaction was to run up on her and beat some sense into her. But she knew even if she beat Marisol to within an inch of her life that night, the next morning she would be in an alley or abandoned house getting high. Crack destroyed so many families, so many generations, and destroyed the dreams of kids like Leon, who wanted to be a medical doctor. Marisol's addiction prevented Leon from focusing on maintaining a high grade point average because he didn't know where his next meal was coming from or where he and his mother would stay if she didn't pay their rent. So, like many of the kids who were born to crack-addicted mothers, Leon turned to the streets for help. And Cyrus, being the kind-hearted predator that he is, welcomed him with open arms. Rumor has it that Cyrus uses Marisol's house as a clubhouse for him and his crew, and in exchange, he pays Marisol's rent. What you doing with them boys? Paris asked Leon. Nothing. Well, being that you're not doing anything with them, you can hang with me. Yo, Leon, Scratch called out to him. He's hanging with me, Paris called out. Scratch shrugged and herded his crew, ages 12 and under, toward Cyrus's side of the park. Can you hold on to this for me? She asked Leon, handing him her helmet. He nodded and took it. This town wasn't always like this, Neil said. No town ever is, Paris responded. What's up with the sheriff? Speak of the devil. Paris looked to her left and saw the sheriff heading right for them. Good afternoon, Sheriff Krupp said to Neil and Paris as he walked up to them. Good afternoon, Sheriff, Neil responded. You must be the pretty little thing who moved into Emma's house, he said to Paris. Yes, I am. Sorry I haven't had a chance to introduce myself before now. My name's Ernest Krupp. Pleased to meet you. Likewise, Paris said, shaking his hand. You working with Neil at the bookstore? Yes. He's a good man. Yes, he is. She stared into Neil's eyes. If you don't mind me asking, what's your relation to Emma? I was one of her foster kids. The sheriff slowly nodded as he looked her up and down. Emma had more kids than the town's football league. It was kind of hard to keep up with all of them, which is probably why I don't remember you. Paris smiled and nodded. Sheriff Krupp looked down at Leon. Hey, young fella, what are you doing out here all by yourself? I'm not by myself. I'm with Paris and Neil. Sheriff Krupp eyed the helmet in his Leon's possession and nodded. Okay. Make sure you get home to your mama before dark. Yes, sir. Sheriff Krupp looked towards Neil and Paris. Y'all enjoy the festivities? We will, Sheriff, Neil said. Paris elbowed Neil. Like I was saying, what's up with the sheriff? Neil and Paris watched him walk up to Cyrus and his crew. Cyrus and the sheriff shook hands and patted each other on the back like they came out of the same mother. You see what's up with him. He's an old white man who's probably making more money on Cyrus's payroll in 1 week than he sees in 1 year. And I bet it's safe to assume that his deputies are just as corrupt. It's safe to say that. And I can't believe people are just sitting back and not doing anything. What are they going to do? Go against a drug dealer? His gang of thugs and a force of corrupt cops? Paris shrugged. Fuck it. If they don't care, I don't care. They hung and tried to enjoy the atmosphere of the barbecue. Paris pulled into her driveway and started to head inside. I remember you. Paris stopped and looked over on her neighbor's porch and saw an old lady rocking back and forth in a chair. Excuse me? Emma used to have to beat your behind every other day. Ooh, you were a little badass. Do I know you? You broke her heart when you ran away. No matter how many kids came and went, she always talked about you. Paris walked over to the old woman's porch. Who are you? I used to say to Emma, don't you worry none, Emma. That child is going to find her way back home. You'll see, and she's going to take care of the children. Ma, you okay? A young woman came to the front door. I thought I heard another voice out here. I didn't mean to disturb you, Paris said to the young woman. Your mother was just telling me, don't pay her any mind. She has Alzheimer's. She just rambles on and on about any and everything. Alzheimer's? But she remembers me from when I used to live next door. My mother can't even remember her own name. It's time to go inside Ma. Okay, Mommy. See? I'm the daughter and she calls me Mommy. Paris watched the young woman help the frail woman up and walk her into the house. Did she really remember me? Paris whispered to herself. She went home, undressed, and got into bed. She racked her brain trying to remember the old woman next door. She said she remembered her, remembered when Emma had to beat her butt. She was right about that. Paris couldn't remember a day Emma didn't have to slap, hit, or punch her. Miss Bell, Paris said out loud as she sat straight up. Oh shit, I remember you, Miss Bell. She was the dental assistant who held her hand when the dentist was putting on her braces. Damn, Miss Bell, you got old. Paris was staring at the ceiling, thinking of her family, the one she left down in the city. She was missing them something terrible. She reached for her cell phone on the table and stopped. She wasn't ready to talk to them yet. She kicked off the sheets and put her clothes back on. Paris decided to go back out. She walked into the lounge and immediately regretted it. T and 4 girls from her clique were sitting at a table tucked in a corner. She rolled her eyes at them and headed to the bar. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked. 5 shots of vodka," she replied. The bartender arched his brow. 5? Paris held her hand up. 5. "Coming right up." "I thought you didn't hang out," T said, walking up on Paris. "I don't." "It looks like you're hanging out to me." Paris cut her eyes at the T's 4-girl clique as they surrounded her. "I'm just having a drink." "Here you go," the bartender said, placing 5 shots in front of her. Paris threw back the first 2 right off the bat. "Damn, you an alcoholic or something?" T asked. "Why are you talking to me?" T put her hand on her hip. "I just wanted to let you know to stay away from Ramel." Paris downed her 3rd shot and looked at T like she was crazy. "What?" "You heard me. I see the way you look at him when he comes to the bookstore." "Bitch, you bugging," Paris said and then downed the 4th shot. "Bitch, you sure you want to go there with me?" Paris downed her last shot. She pulled out a 20 and placed it under one of the empty shot glasses. When she got up to leave, T blocked her way. "Where you think you going, bitch?" Paris shoved her out the way and exited the bar. She didn't get halfway through the parking lot before T rushed out of the lounge with her 4-girl crew. "Where's your bike, Dyke?" The girls laughed at T's remark. "Hey, Dyke. I know you hear me." Paris stopped walking. "Yeah, bitch. That's what I'm talking about," T said, walking up on her. Her girls surrounded Paris once again. "You need to grow up," Paris said. "You need to shut the fuck up." T swung on her. Paris deflected the blow and backed up into one of T's crew. The girl pushed her back into T. T got a punch off to Paris's cheek. Paris got off 3, 1 to T's jaw, another to her forehead, and the last one to her temple. T backed up and looked at Paris in shock. "Gina," T yelled out to one of her girls. "Shoot this bitch." Paris looked at the girl T was talking to and watched her pull a .25 out of her jacket pocket. Gina looked no more than 17 years old. Paris stopped breathing as the 17-year-old raised the gun and aimed at Paris's chest. "Yo, put that away." Gina saw Cyrus and immediately stuck it back in her jacket. Paris slowly exhaled. "What the fuck are you doing?" he asked T. "This bitch disrespected me." "Go back inside, now." T sucked her teeth and headed back to the lounge. "What the fuck are y'all still standing here for?" Cyrus said to T's girls. They headed back to the lounge. Paris started to walk off. Cyrus gently grabbed her by the arm. "Where's your bike?" "I walked." "You walked all the way here by yourself?" "My house isn't far from here." "It's dark as hell." "I'm not afraid of the dark." "The dark is the least of your problems out here at night." "I can handle myself." "Yeah, I peeped that." "I never saw a girl hit another girl that hard." "And so many times." Paris picked up her pace. "Hold up. Let me give you a ride home." "Nah, I'm good." Cyrus ran to his truck. He pulled up alongside her. "Hop in." "I said I'm good." "Come on now. I'm not going to let you walk home in the dark." Paris stopped walking. "I'll drop you off and break out. No funny stuff." She opened the door and climbed in. Cyrus cracked a smile and pulled off. "I heard you used to live here." "I used to." "Is that why people flock around you?" "People don't flock around me." "Sure they do. The kids hang out at your house, people who never stepped foot in Neil's bookstore, are now in there half the day talking to you. You're like a hometown girl who left, became a famous movie star, and then came back." Paris laughed. "You're funny." "I'm dead serious. I've been watching you. I recognize real when I see it. You're so full of shit. See, that's what I'm talking about, realness. You don't bite your tongue, and from what I saw back there, you definitely don't hold back your punches. You would fit in just fine with my Albany team. Albany team? That's where I'm from. I run all of the downtown Albany. So why are you here in this small town? Cyrus took one hand off the steering wheel and rubbed his thumb and first two fingers together. Opportunity. And now I'm offering you one. Not interested. I can take care of you. I take care of myself. Been doing it for years. Well, maybe it's time for you to let someone else take over that responsibility, he said, pulling up to the curb in front of her house. Paris opened the door and got out. The next time someone from your crew pulls a gun on me, you're going to see just how real I can get. Cyrus smiled. I like your style. Paris slammed his truck door. Cyrus pulled off as she headed up her steps. You okay? Paris turned around. What are you doing here? Neil walked up the steps. Jerry called me from the lounge. He said T and some girls were trying to roll on you. When I got there, I saw you hopping in Cyrus's truck. Neil saw the light bruise that T's punch left on Paris's cheek. He tried to touch it. It's nothing, Paris said, turning her head. You don't have to act tough all the time. Who said I was acting? She didn't move when he touched the bruise. She could see the anger and hurt in his eyes. The last thing she wanted him to do was go get himself into trouble. You want to come in for a while? She offered. It's kind of late, Neil said. You have a curfew? She asked. You're something else. You know that? They headed inside. Just so you know, Paris said as she took off her jacket. Nothing's happening tonight. What about tomorrow night? She threw her jacket at him. She disappeared into the bathroom and came back with an ice pack for her cheek. Can I get you something to drink? Neil was in the living room looking at the pictures on the wall. I'll take a beer. Paris grabbed 2 bottles out of the fridge and entered the living room. She handed him one. Thank you, she said. For what? Coming out to check on me? I'm going to have a long talk with Cyrus. His clique is getting out of control. That won't be necessary. Cyrus and I had a little chat on our way here. He has to hear it from me as well. And why is that? He has to know that I'm not just going to sit back and watch you being messed with. That's so sweet, she said, grabbing his hand. But don't get yourself killed on account of me. Cyrus is not going to lay a hand on me. His face softened. So which of these is you? He said, pointing to the pictures. That one, right there. Wow. What? You were an ugh mug. Fuck you, she said, pushing him. He grabbed her arms as he stumbled back. He fell on the couch. She fell on top of him. Paris didn't move. Neil didn't say a word. Neil's body was hard and warm. Paris felt her temperature rising. She stood up. I'm not ugly anymore. No, you're not, he said, sitting up. He studied a picture on the wall. What? He stood up and walked to the picture. That's Scratch. Paris looked at the picture of the 8-year-old. That is him. Neil studied the rest of the pictures more closely. I know a lot of these kids. Most of them are still here in town. He was studying the pictures so hard that he didn't notice Paris standing on the side of him, staring at him with lust in her eyes. She reached out and touched his lips. He turned to her. He grabbed her hand and kissed her fingers. She closed her eyes. Neil? Yes. Remember what I told you earlier about nothing happening tonight? Yeah. She pulled her hand away. I wasn't playing. Neil stared at her and then smiled. I'll see you at work tomorrow. I'm off tomorrow and Sunday. Well then, I'll see you Monday, he said, walking out the door without looking back. When he shut the door, Paris exhaled. Paris stepped out of her house Monday morning and saw the newspaper on her welcome mat. "What the hell is wrong with this boy?" she said, referring to the paper boy. She told him on 3 different occasions that he kept dropping the paper at the wrong house. She picked it up and headed next door. "Good morning, Miss Bell." "Good morning, Emma," Miss Bell said, as she rocked in her rocking chair. "No, Miss Bell, I'm not Emma. I'm Paris." "Paris is a good girl. Give her some time. She'll come back. You'll see." "Miss Bell, Emma's gone." Miss Bell looked at her. "Paris will be back. You'll see." Paris laid the newspaper on Miss Bell's lap. "I have to go to work. I'll talk to you later." "Okay, Emma." Paris walked away and hopped on her bike. That was creepy. Paris whispered as she rode off. Chapter 4. When Paris walked into the bookstore, Neil was holding his head. "Neil, what's up? You didn't hear?" "Hear what?" He shoved the Albany Times-Union to her. Jermaine Thomas, a.k.a. Scratch, age 13, was gunned down in the Arbor Hills section of Albany last night in apparent gang retaliation. Jermaine escaped from a DFY facility 2 years ago and hadn't been seen since. The names of the other teens involved are being withheld until their guardians are contacted. Paris dropped the paper on the counter. "That's fucked up," Neil said. "That's fucked up," Paris said, pointing to Cyrus's Tahoe parked in front of the diner. "He drove those kids to Albany to do his dirty work. Now, they're dead, and he's having breakfast like nothing happened." She walked off. "Paris, where are you going?" She walked across the street and barged into the diner. The look in her eyes silenced everyone. As she walked towards Cyrus's table, Raymel stood up. "What's up?" She pushed past him. "Yo." He grabbed her by the shoulder. Paris spun around and brought an uppercut from her knees, tagging Raymel square under the chin. He hit the floor face first and didn't move. Cyrus stood up, eyes wide. T. Ramel's girl shook off the shock of seeing her man getting knocked out by a chick and charged Paris. She ran into a left jab and a right hook. She screamed and grabbed her coochie after Paris kicked her in the crotch with a steel-toed boot. Cyrus yoked Paris from behind. Paris struggled to break free. She stomped on his feet, kicked him in his shins, clawed at his arms, but Cyrus refused to break the hold. His fear of feeling Paris's wrath caused his arms to lock like vice grips around her neck. The sheriff ran through the door with Neil on his heels. The sheriff pried Cyrus's arms from around Paris's neck and pushed Cyrus back. Neil grabbed Cyrus and held him back. "This fucking bitch is crazy," Cyrus shouted. "You're a murderer." Paris broke free and charged him. Neil got caught in the middle of the blows coming from both sides. A deputy ran in, grabbed Paris, and wrestled her to the floor. He struggled to handcuff her, but Paris managed to spin onto her back. She ripped the cuffs out of his grip. She slipped her fingers through the cuffs and balled her hand around them. She pulled her arm back, and just as she was about to let it fly into the deputy's face, Sheriff Krupp's boot came down on Paris's face. Everything went black. Paris sat on the cot in the holding pen, staring out the window when the sheriff approached the cell. "I've talked to the young man and woman you assaulted. They don't want to press charges." Paris chuckled. "Young man and young woman? Is that what you're calling murderers and drug dealers these days?" Sheriff Krupp looked over his shoulder and then stepped up to the cell. "I don't know what your problem is, but I'm not going to have a loose cannon running wild, spreading rumors in my town. Now, like I said, the young man and young woman aren't going to press charges. But there is the matter of you assaulting one of my deputies." Paris looked up at him and laughed. "Assault? Is that the best you can do?" "Assault with a deadly weapon." Paris stopped laughing. "Yeah, when you balled your fist around them cuffs, you made yourself a makeshift pair of brass knuckles. You probably would have cracked his skull open if I didn't subdue you." "You mean kick me in the face with your size 12 boot?" Where you're going, getting kicked in the face will be the least of your worries. You're looking at 5 years of state prison time." Paris dropped her head in defeat and lay down on the cot. She quickly sat back up when she heard the cell open. "Or," Sheriff Krupp said as he stepped into the cell, "you can just hop on that bike of yours and don't ever come back. Choice is yours." Doesn't sound like much of a choice. But it's a choice, nonetheless. Paris looked at him for a moment and slowly nodded. "If you don't mind, I would like to talk to my real estate agent and have him put the house on the market." "You have 3 days. I see you here after that." Sheriff Krupp stepped out of the cell. Paris tentatively stepped out of the cell, expecting deputies to tackle her at any second. Sheriff Krupp walked her to the curb. 3 days, Sheriff Krupp reminded her. Paris walked off on him and headed to the bookstore to retrieve her bike. Neil walked out the bookstore when he saw her. "You okay?" Paris hopped on her bike. Neil put his hand on her shoulder. She shrugged it off and started her bike. "What are you going to do?" She peeled off, leaving him in a cloud of burned rubber. Chapter 5. Paris sat in her living room, staring at the pictures on the wall. The old woman's words from next door replayed in her head. "Why me, Emma? Why leave me this house?" She looked out the window when she caught light reflecting off of something shiny. She dived to the floor as the guns went off. Glass shattered all around her as she crawled out of the living room and into the kitchen. Moments later, she heard tires peeling off into the night. The deputy looked up from his notepad. "And you didn't get a look at who shot at your house?" "No." He flipped his notepad shut when he saw the sheriff approaching. Paris stared at him as he stared at her backpack. "Going somewhere?" "I'll call my real estate agent when I get to where I'm going. I'm quite sure we can conduct our business over the phone and online." The sheriff looked around before spitting out a glob of chewing tobacco. "I'll follow you to the town limits and make sure you get out safely." The sheriff followed her a little past the town limits before slowing down and swinging a U-turn. Paris rode into the next town and got a motel room. She threw her backpack on the bed and pulled out her cell phone. She scrolled down to the number she wanted and stared at it. She knew once she made this call, there was no turning back. Paris closed her eyes and thought about Scratch. Then she hit dial. "Talk to me," the voice on the other end said. "Sid, I need you." "Where are you?" Paris gave her the name of the motel and the room number. "And Sid, bring the family." 4:30 in the morning, a black Dodge Charger drove into the motel's parking lot and stopped in front of room 103. The Charger's passenger side door swung open, and out stepped Sid, all 6 foot, 220 pounds of her. She wore a black trench coat, fitted cap just above her eyes, and black Timbs laced to the top. She walked up to room 103, all the while cutting her eyes left and right, focusing on shadows and dark corners. Before she had a chance to knock, Paris opened the door. Paris looked up at her and couldn't stop smiling. Sid could tell that she had been crying. Sid hugged her and stepped in. "Who we rolling on?" she asked, shrugging off her trench and tossing it on the bed. She stood in the middle of the floor, clenching and unclenching her hands. Paris stared at the Kevlar vest in .45, tucked in Sid's shoulder holster. "Where's the rest of the family?" The hotel door banged open. "Be careful what you wish for," Mimi said. She ran in and hugged Paris. "I miss you." "I miss you too." 12 more women walked in behind Mimi and hugged Paris. "Jamie?" Paris said, looking at the last girl to walk in. Jamie pulled up her sleeve and proudly flashed her cold-blooded tattoo, snaking all the way up her arm. "I'm family now." Paris ran to her and hugged her tight. "So, who we rolling on?" Precious asked. Precious was second in charge, and she was all business, no play. Paris gave them the rundown. There's this kid out of Albany who calls himself Cyrus. He's got half of Albany on lock, and he's expanding his enterprise into my town, and he's killing the children." "Killing the children?" Mimi said. "He's using them as soldiers to knock off his competition. 2 nights ago, 4 teens from my town were shot and killed in Albany in what the papers are calling a gang retaliation." Paris started to tear. "He's got to go." Precious folded her arms. "And how did this become our problem?" "This motherfucker is killing kids," Paris said. Precious pulled up Paris's sleeve. "This is what we are," she said, pointing to the cold-blooded tattoo. "Kids die every day. Get over it." "Precious is right," Sid said. "This has nothing to do with us." "Yes, it does. This is what we're about," Paris said. "Getting paid by any means necessary is what we're about," Precious said. Paris looked to Sid. "I ran away from this town when I was 14 to find my mother. I had nothing but the clothes on my back. I hooked up with some bikers, and I did what I had to do to survive. And one night when I was being passed around like a blunt in a shithouse bar, in busts this 6-foot Amazon and kills the head of the bikers with her bare hands." Sid looked at Mimi, who began to tear. "Those motherfuckers left Mimi for dead in that dumpster 3 days prior. It was only a matter of time before they did the same to you. You and the family lit that bar up. Only 3 of them got away that night. And we hunted their asses down," Mimi said. "And they paid for what they did to me, and for what they did to you." "What was the family's motivation back then?" Paris looked around the room. "All of us have a horror story to tell. Me and Mimi gang raped by bikers. Jamie molested for years by different foster parents. And you?" Paris walked up to Precious. "You were only 6 years old when your crackhead mother started prostituting you out to support her habit." "Fuck you," Precious whispered. "And you, Sid, you were kidnapped by your boyfriend's connect when he couldn't come up with the $50,000 he owed him. Instead of him hustling up the loot he owed, he left you for dead. How long did they keep you down in that basement, chained to the radiator?" "Ballers from all over the neighborhood paid a king's ransom to come down in that basement, to have their way with the ex-queen of Philly." Sid slapped her. Paris continued staring her in the eye. Sid slapped her again. Paris didn't flinch. "My little biker chick, tough as shit," Sid said, looking around at her crew. "Ladies, I don't know about y'all, but just thinking of putting my .45 in this punk's mouth and pulling the trigger has gotten my adrenaline pumping." Everyone started laughing. Sid grabbed her trench off the bed and put it on. Everyone else in the room nodded their approval. Sid looked at Paris. "So, what's the plan?" Neil looked out the window when he heard Paris's bike. He did a double take when she walked in. She was wearing a black tank top, black jeans, and Timbs. As she approached the counter, he could see the cold-blooded tattoo swirling up her arm. "Paris? Where can I find Cyrus?" "How would I know?" "Neil, we're cool and everything, but now's not the time to fuck with me. Where is he?" Neil turned to the window when he saw 3 black Yukons and a Dodge Charger pull up. "Neil," Paris whispered, "just tell me what I need to know. They won't ask nicely." "I'm not a snitch, Paris." Paris looked toward the front window and shook her head, indicating to Sid that Neil wasn't cooperating. The doors on all 3 trucks and the Dodge Charge flew open. Sid and the rest of Cold-Blooded swarmed into the bookstore like a nest of angry hornets. Neil backed up against the wall when Precious leaped over the counter and pressed her gun against his forehead. Okay, I'll tell you. Cyrus and Rammel were in the living room, smoking a blunt and watching TV when the front door almost flew off its hinges. "What the fuck?" Rammel reached for his gun on the table. Precious had her .38 in his mouth before he got to it. Cyrus ran out the living room toward the back door. He opened it and caught the butt end of Jamie's shotgun with his mouth. He fell on his ass. Paris walked in and kicked him in the face. "Get your punk ass up," she said, kicking him in the stomach. He got up and limped back to the living room. Paris shoved him to the couch. Scratch would be alive today if it weren't for you. Cyrus touched his spilt lip with his tongue and then with his hand. Scratch knew what he was getting into. He was only 13. Don't you feel anything over his death and the other kids who died with him? Cyrus looked around the room of angry-looking biker chicks and thought about choosing his words carefully. But he knew that would show weakness, and these women would eat him alive if he showed any weakness. It's all part of the game. You just made doing what I have to do that much easier. Cyrus chuckled. And what are you going to do? Sid walked into the house and closed the front door. He's pulling up. Who's pulling up? Cyrus asked. Shh, Jamie said, pointing her shotgun at his chest. Cyrus, the sheriff called out as he stepped onto the porch. Sid opened the door and snatched the old man off his feet. The sheriff landed on his back in the center of the living room. The impact from the toss knocked the wind out of him, but he was able to muster enough strength to reach for his pistol. Mimi stomped on his hand before he could get to it. What the hell is this? He asked, Archie said, looking up at the women. The pain he was in was evident on his face. Paris stepped out of the crowd of women. Sheriff Krupp saw her and his eyes widened with shock. Justice, Paris said, snatching his pistol out of its holster. You, Sheriff Krupp said. You're nothing more than a common thug. And you're a hero, Sheriff, Paris responded. A hero? Yes. You came here and took out these two drug-dealing thugs all by yourself. You busted in and shot Ramel twice. Paris shot Ramel twice in the chest with the sheriff's gun. Whoa, whoa, Cyrus yelled as he tried to climb off the couch, but Sid and Precious pinned him to the couch. Precious jammed her shotgun in between Cyrus's legs. Interrupt again, and I'll blow your balls off. Cyrus stopped moving. Paris continued with her scenario. But then Cyrus got to Ramel's gun and shot you in the stomach. Precious shot the sheriff in the gut with Ramel's gun. Cyrus's fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. He jumped off the couch and tried to make a run for the front door. Precious and Sid backed away. Paris shot him 3 times in the chest with the sheriff's gun. Sid's body slid right up to the sheriff. The sheriff looked at Paris in shock. Paris smiled and continued. You were able to shoot Cyrus 3 times in the chest before dying from the 2 bullet wounds you took in the stomach. 2? Wait! Precious shot him again in the stomach. Everyone looked toward the top of the stairs. I found her hiding in the closet, Jamie said. That's Romel's girl, Paris said. Sid grabbed the guns from Paris. Get out of here. We'll take care of the rest. I want to stay, Paris said. That wasn't part of the plan. Go, we got this. Paris looked toward the stairway at T. T was crying and shaking, with pee coming down her legs. Paris knew Sid wasn't going to let T out of the house alive. Paris started to open her mouth to plead for T's life, but she knew her pleas would fall on deaf ears and her loyalty would be questioned. Paris walked out the house, got on her bike, and tried to get far away fast so she didn't have to hear the single gunshot that she knew would come from Sid's gun. 2 months later, Paris rode her bike onto the sidewalk and stopped in front of the bookstore. She climbed off and walked in. Neil looked up from the book he was reading. Hey, Paris looked around. How's business? Business has declined since you left. Don't try and make me feel guilty. Would it make you come back? No, the kids need me. I need you. Paris walked behind the counter and kissed him. And you have me. Since you opened that youth center in memory of Scratch, I'm seeing less and less of you. Tonight, you're going to see a lot of me, she said, kissing him again. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close. You are so beautiful. You're getting some tonight, so you don't have to sweet-talk me. Are we going to have the house to ourselves? You know I can't do my thing with Sid and them around. They intimidate you? Hell yeah. Paris started laughing. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. When I'm around them, I feel like a goldfish in a tank with piranhas. They love you. Like cats love mice. Well, you will be pleased to know that Sid told me they are going back to the city this weekend. Thank God. Paris punched him in the arm. Don't say that. It is because of them that this town is back to normal. Neil nodded. You're right. I can't take that away from them. We owe them big time. And don't you forget that, on the outskirts of town, a black Yukon pulled into a barn. Precious and 3 females from the clique got out. Sid walked into the barn. Talk to me. Precious opened the cargo area of the Yukon. According to Rammel's girlfriend, we just hit the last of Cyrus's stash houses in Albany. Sid looked at the kilos of dope and nodded. So what's the plan? Precious asked. We got a whole lot of coke and dope. We're setting up shop. Where? Right here. In Paris's town? What better place? We have no competition. I don't think Paris will approve. Paris is going to do what the fuck I tell her to do. And if she doesn't, then she goes into the ground like the sheriff, Cyrus Rammel and his girlfriend. That's cold, Sid. No, bitch. That's cold-blooded.